Welcome to the first program in a new series from FedGov Today, AI in Depth. I'm the host of FedGov Today, Francis Rose. Artificial intelligence is hitting its stride as a technology tied to use cases all across the federal government. The Federal Chief Information Officer, Clare Martorana, says AI will be a critical tool in the federal government's customer experience initiatives. The Deputy Secretary of Defense, Kathleen Hicks, says the Defense Department's AI investments are, quote, yielding returns much faster than most new defense capabilities. Virtually every federal agency has artificial intelligence projects in development or in implementation. On this program, you'll go in depth with movers from government and industry that are leading the AI charge. Leaders from the Department of Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development, and the Department of Veterans Affairs, AWS, Palo Alto Networks, and EY are here to discuss what they're doing with AI now, what it means, and what's ahead for AI and for government-industry collaboration. We begin with Dmitry Kuznetsov. He's Undersecretary for Science and Technology at the Department of Homeland Security. Dominic Del Molino is Vice President for Worldwide Public Sector Technology and Innovation at AWS. Gentlemen, welcome. It's great to see both of you. Dmitry, I start with you. What are you seeing right now, not just at DHS, but broadly across the government as far as specific use cases that people are doing with AI? Welcome.
Great question. First, great to see you again, Francis.
Thank you.
No, this is an important question. AI is on everybody's mind. It is permeating every agency. I would say there isn't a single kind of use case in government, and so where agencies gravitate varies. In a science agency, it can be very open-ended. We're a mission agency at Homeland Security, so we focus on outcomes. It's not so much about AI, it's about how can we do the job better, faster, more effortlessly, more for less. And a lot of use cases there.
The concept that you just got to is one that I think some agencies are struggling with. It's not about the AI, it's about the end, it's about the mission.
Yeah.
How do you keep folks focused on that idea at DHS to think this might be a potential application for AI rather than how do we get some AI and sprinkle it on some problem?
We try and measure return on investment. It's been an effort this year to try and see, well, what do we think it will do? What are the kind of targets? And we're seeing really a lot of remarkable things happening. You know, just an example, what took 3 years ago, 3 years for 10 people, experts in networks on bulk cash laundering to create and understand the networks and the data now takes 3 days. You know, it is night and day in many different places where smarter tools on the complex data that law enforcement gathers are yielding real things already, and it makes a difference. It doesn't go everywhere, it's not for everything, but there are places where it makes a difference, so you have to pick and choose. I
want to come back to that idea of data later in the conversation. Dom, welcome. It's great to see you again, too.
Great to be here. Thank you.
What does what Dmitry just described fit with what you're seeing as you talk to clients across government?
Yeah, one of the things Dmitry said that I think is really powerful is there's not just one use case for AI. I think a lot of people have been captured by this idea of a large-scale, general-purpose AI capability, but what we're seeing instead is those mission capabilities understanding that they can develop and use AIs that are tuned and specific for those mission purposes. We're going to get to that explosion of data, and that's made this general purpose AI kind of something that seems more readily available. But that explosion of data also means there's data that can be used for specific use cases for specific missions. And that's one of the things we're hearing more about.
All right, a little semantics thing that I picked up on there just a moment ago and before we went on the air. You used AI, plural, AIs. What's behind that? There's got to be something there.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think a lot of people think there's this one AI, but what we're really seeing are you can use AI that's tuned for purpose. It's good at understanding language. It's good at understanding sound. It's good at understanding pictures. It's good at understanding context or data that's specific to the mission. You want an AI that's tuned for that because it'll be much more efficient and it'll be much more able to give the good answers that you need for that specific mission purpose. So we see this collection of AI starting to really blossom.
That's what you're talking about, I guess, when you referred to
tailored use cases.
Yeah, when you're talking about law enforcement in particular. CBP, I know, is a big user of artificial intelligence technology and so on.
Yeah, and with CBP, you know, we created tools for them that track all of the air and marine traffic so we can try and filter out of all of the vast amounts of data what things need to be paid attention to. And we've improved from tracking and paying attention to 500,000 a year up to 100 million now. The remarkable ramp up in the volume of what we can do with the same people without having to build out capabilities further. The tools are very enabling.
So either in the context of AI broadly or AIs in particular, to use Dom's term, what's your sense of the industry partnerships that DHS is building, and what makes a good partnership in that way?
It's first, DHS is a bit of a boutique organization. We have a lot of niche needs, and it doesn't always align well. And so we look for partners that can help and align with the outcomes that we're looking for. And so we need flexibility. Often we just can't find off-the-shelf solutions. If it would be great if we could.
Yes.
The world isn't like that. So working with partners with the private sector, using the instruments we have in small business initiatives, in Silicon Valley Innovation Program that we have, in prize competitions. We use many different instruments as well to try and cultivate the ecosystem and partnerships we require.
The prize competitions are particularly interesting to me because as a numbers person sometimes, you wind up with solutions that are probably different than you would have gotten through a traditional procurement process.
Oh yeah,
and often a lot less expensive.
Yeah, because you only formulate the kind of outcome you're looking for, the grand goal, and it's up to people's creativity and initiative. And so things can surprise you.
That concept that stuff isn't easily available off the shelf for government applications is another thing that you and I talked about a little bit before we went on the air, Dom, and that is that agencies are asking you more questions about how to build their own.
Yeah, it's a combination of both building their own and taking off-the-shelf things and tuning them for those specific use cases. The innovation pace just keeps increasing. Every day we're seeing a new AI capability introduced. And so we're really trying to see and listen to our government customers who talk about, is there a way that we can evaluate and understand whether or not this capability can be tuned for our use case, or should we go ahead and look at ways to build it ourselves, because it seems to be getting ever easier to do so. Mm-hmm. So making those decisions is really important to understand, and this gets to working backwards from the use case. What's the goal, and what's the most cost-effective and efficient way to get there using one of these AI capabilities?
What's the best way for you as an industry person to find out what the mission need really is in order to be able to do it the direction that you just described?
Yeah, I would say there's two things. The first is trying to understand, what is the test and evaluation framework going to look like? How do we make sure we can objectively demonstrate that the AI capability is doing what's needed? And then I think, in addition to seeing what that is from the government point of view, having an opportunity to kind of go back and forth and shape that or understand that or add to it with what we're seeing from other industries where they're coming up with different ways to evaluate the models as well. So expanding the horizon of how something gets evaluated, I think results in a better end goal.
You were nodding your head pretty enthusiastically as Dom was describing it. Does that sound like the other side of what you need from industry when you're working with somebody?
It's that kind of flexibility that really makes a difference. It's not coming and getting a sealed proprietary product that you can't build on, that you can't pivot when the world changes, mm-hmm. and be responsive to what the country needs. And so you have to have a flexibility built in different than kind of what you get in transactional things that you buy.
I'm not going to ask you to pick on them in particular, but broadly, how is industry doing at that flexibility? That's something I know agencies have been asking for in a number of areas, not just AI, for a long time.
So, generally very good.
Yeah.
I think from my lens, in again, a large law enforcement agency, it's often tied to other things you need. So it's not just a data issue. It's not just an AI issue. It's all the environmental factors. It's the people. It's the kinds of things you're trying to accomplish. And so when you bring all that together, you need sometimes a broader sense of teaming, which is not always natural. Mm-hmm. That we don't just need you as a partner. We need a few of you as a partner to try and attack this problem. But we're finding a lot of responsive companies.
How do you make sure that you stay out of the conundrum, Dimitri, that a lot of agencies have gotten into over the years? Again, not just about AI, but it's software in general, which is we need something special, but we might not need it to be completely written from scratch for us. We may be able to modify, as Dom described, or maybe there is some solution that will work for us off the shelf, trying to avoid a customization scenario.
Customization has always been hard. I was in that business in the national security side for many years, and it can be a trap when you think you have to write your own. And the best value we've had is working with private sector companies to either launch them, work with them to create something that has a commercial pull besides just our need, but also just to see where they're going and see, could we support an add-on? Can we do some NRE with them to support something that helps them move forward, but also gives us what we want? Because at the end of the day, you need a support for the tools. You have to have a company there to update, to upgrade, to be ready with the standardization if you need for the next generation of tools. And if you don't have that, you'll end up with a dead-end technology.
Dom, are other agencies getting that idea? Do they have the message that Dimitri just put out there too?
They do. I mean, we use a term at AWS we call undifferentiated heavy lifting. And that's something we want to make sure that the agencies understand. If it's undifferentiated, if it's something that's commercially available, take advantage of it. Where's the necessary differentiation, and how do you get to that quickly, and how do you get there flexibly? And that's something we want to make sure agencies understand, that they can appreciate that something that's common can be reused, but also tuned for the specific mission use case. And so we're getting good understanding. Oftentimes going into the cost argument, we can get this done quicker, it's not going to be as expensive. So I think that's another thing that resonates really well, and it helps people say, oh, I can get to mission outcome with a much higher ROI.
That sounds like the kind of the nirvana there. We can get to mission faster.
Yeah.
Is that enough of a motivator, though, to keep people out of the thing that we've seen so many times over no, we really need to build our own. We really need to have our own thing.
Yeah, I think that speed is important. Another element is, if this isn't going to work well, we can pivot relatively easily. And so that also gives someone the flexibility to understand, okay, I can adjust as I understand more to get closer to the outcome I want. It may be at the same pace, but I've learned a lot more, and I know I've got something that's really specific and useful for my mission.
We talked about data earlier in the conversation. Mm-hmm. What's the status kind of the data quality that's coming through the various parts of DHS? I imagine the answer is it depends.
It depends, yeah.
Yeah, but overall, do you see forward progress? Do you see momentum in the data quality and obviously quantity in order to feed these AI tools well?
Yeah, and I think it's emergent. Secretary Mayorkas recently stood up the AI task force, and the data side of this and the infrastructure is part of what we're looking at. I co-chair that with our CIO, Eric Eisen. The data side is non-trivial. We're replete in data. We have so much data. You think of TSA and 5 or 6 million scans of handheld luggage every day. The volume of things we get, the diversity are excellent use cases for, what people talk about, large language models today and foundation models. And so there is how we thought about AI, so hence AIs, yesterday. The AI of today is different than it was yesterday, and how we think of data is also going to be different. And so I think looking ahead, we have work to do still. Mm-hmm. But I think there are remarkable opportunities coming out of what you can do with these foundation models and generative AI.
How you think about data is going to be different tomorrow. In what ways, Dimitri?
Because what they've demonstrated, certainly with large language models, which is just for words, but you can do it for images, for any other kind of content, in trying to understand risk in the information. You don't have to create a model for every particular application. You can stockpile, if you want, vast amounts of data, create an interpretation of that, and then just build on specific applications or use cases. If you have something new you want to do, you don't have to recreate everything. It's already there. And so how you think about the differential value of adding a new function is far simpler if you invest in the data in a structurally different way than yesterday.
Are agencies' data efforts getting better, cleaner, faster, more efficient? What are you seeing?
They are, and I think it is in result of this understanding of the power of data and getting it right, and then how I can put it to work, put it to use. And as Dimitri said, what we're seeing is this coming fusion of government data and open source or publicly available data that can then be tuned for that specific use case. And as agencies have understood that it's possible to leverage the baseline data that's out there and then tune it with that fusion with government-specific data or agency-specific data, they're really getting their house in order to say, oh, I really need to make sure I can take advantage of it in this way. So let's get it put that way so we can then take advantage of these models that are out there.
The national security and intelligence community may be the movers on that because they've been mixing open source intelligence with proprietary intelligence for a number of years now. Is that the same kind of model that we're talking about here?
Absolutely, and I think it's an understanding of the value of even data that wouldn't necessarily have risen to that level from before, but it actually is the vast volume of that's been collected for a specific use case now can be tuned and structured in a way that then becomes much more useful.
Dimitri, you've talked about some of the success stories that you've seen at DHS. Are those success stories now starting to reach critical mass where people who early on might have been hesitant or might have been disinterested in adopting these tools are saying, okay, I get it, and I really want to see what the possibilities are for me?
I think we're starting to see that. As we've been tabulating ROIs this year, as we've been trying to demonstrate the use cases, because use cases mean we've already deployed it, and so you have to go back to the development, which was some time ago, to figure out how it's being used. So there is a lag time in the system. But we do see that it is a remarkable saver of people's time when you can do far more for far less than you thought. And the only instrument you have is no longer, well, we have to staff up, we have to grow to accommodate the demand signal. When you realize, well, we can get a 50x speed up by using these tools with the same people we have.
What are the ROI markers that are most important to you and your colleagues at DHS?
It depends. So there is no simple answer to that. And I think for every activity, we have to ask ourselves, why do we need to spend another dollar in this direction? How do we determine that this is the right value against the mission? And so, for the AI projects, I look to see, is this speed up the right place where we need it, based on the short list of things that are on the nation's agenda, whether it's transnational criminal organizations or fentanyl or migration or, pick your area. There are so many places where more use of these tools can have a remarkable impact.
The quick list that I scribbled down as Dimitri was talking about potential ROI markers, Dom, time, money, mission delivery markers. Are there others that agencies are paying attention to?
I do think it's the efficiency element too. So there's, how do I empower my people to be more efficient and more capable? They're getting more things asked of them. How do I give them tools? How can AI be an assistant to help them be much more effective? So this way of augmenting efficiency of individuals and making them more efficient is another marker that we've seen that people are asking about.
Quick final thought. What does this look like, Dimitri, in your view, a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now? Or is it so hard to predict because of the way the nature of the landscape is changing?
I'd say three things. One, AI is not an endpoint. So, it's not a final solution of anything, so we are moving through it. There will be things beyond that. Second, with it comes risk, and we're trying to understand the adversarial side of this. So, there are opportunities, but we have to walk hand in hand with the limitations. But the third thing is really the remarkable opportunities are everywhere, and I'd like to see more of it, more visibility, more awareness of how we adopt these and change the way we operate in a way so that, again, it's not just a manpower need, it's a technology opportunity as well.
Dimitri Kuznetsov, Dom Del Molino, it's great to see both of you again. Thanks very much for joining me today. You can read more about industry and government collaboration and what DHS S&T is doing with AI at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, ethics in AI and the path ahead for serving veterans. AI in Depth continues in a moment. Don't go away. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. Customer experience is one of the pillars of the President's management agenda. I mentioned at the beginning of the program that federal CIO Clare Martorana says AI will be an important part of the federal government's CX efforts. One of the agencies using AI to improve the experience of the people it serves is the Department of Veterans Affairs. Gil Alterovitz is Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer at the VA. Joe Boy is System Engineer for Palo Alto Networks. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. Gil, it's great to see you again. Saw you a couple of weeks back at your AI Summit. What was the reason you wanted to get people who weren't necessarily AI folks together to talk about what you're doing with AI across the agency?
Yeah, the AI Summit's really been an exciting adventure. We've had a couple of these now. They're beginning to be kind of an annual series to really bring people together because AI is really a multidisciplinary field. You may think about AI experts, but you also need them to work together with domain experts in particular areas where it might be applied. There's customer experience needs. There's different aspects that really create a team. And so to do that, you have to kind of form these teams, and to network in conferences like this is where we discover new use cases, discover different projects going on in different locations, and sometimes actually form new teams as a result, new collaborations. And so it's really been exciting to see the development over the years as we see how we can translate from that research and development to operations, to see the development as we went from just like a dozen or so use cases now to well over 100.
What has driven that explosion, other than the demand signal, obviously, from across the agency, but what's driven that? Is it that people have said, I think I understand what a potential use case would be, here's how we would do it, is there a tool available to help us, or is there some other way that you're seeing that momentum happening?
I think it's a combination of several factors. So one, the technology has really taken a step up. It's kind of been a step function, both in terms of the hardware and especially the type of software and algorithms that are available. People have seen a number of these sort of large language models, generative AI. They enable new types of use cases that weren't possible before, or that before would not have been done in as an efficient way. And so it's just a larger number of use cases, and then also the types of data that has become available, the amount of data, the speed at which you can get access to that data, that's important for building the models. You can think of the models almost like compressed information in some way. And so the more information you have, the better you can learn. And so as we are able to better interconnect that data, we're also better able to build models. And of course, as you said, the demand signal, there's a huge demand for this, and only recently are we able to start to satisfy that demand by having and creating these large models that can be suitable in different types of application areas.
I want to come back to that idea of satisfying the demand signal later in the conversation, Gil, but one of the takeaways from the conversations I had with folks there, I had 4 terrific conversations with VA people that are in the archive of the FedGov Today podcast at fedgovtoday.com. But one of the big themes that I took away from all of those was the concept of trustworthy AI. How do you define trustworthy AI at VA?
Right, that's a great question, and that's actually what we've spent a lot of time over the past probably a couple years, is to define a trustworthy AI framework. And we actually define it in terms of these different principles, whether something be purposeful, whether it satisfies certain fairness and equitable kind of constraints. And so that framework actually, as part of the summit, it was actually announced by the secretary that the VA has adopted this department-wide department-wide trustworthy AI framework that builds on a number of different initiatives that have come out, whether it be in the last few years, whether it be the AI Bill of Rights and different executive orders and so forth. And then it also tailors it to what the VA's needs, the veterans' needs, takes into account a number of frameworks there. And so it's been really useful for us to have that framework. So then now as we can leverage that and develop it and further to see how it can apply to these different use cases. So we can evaluate use cases and see how they fit along on this kind of this area of a trustworthy AI so that we can make sure to move forward and serve the veterans in the best way possible.
Joe, welcome. It's great to see you. You have written about a number of times ethics in artificial intelligence. How does what you are doing and what the company is doing comport with what Gil talked about trustworthy AI at VA?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's important for our company as a provider of cybersecurity to ensure that the customers who entrust us with their data and how we use that data is protected, right? And so when we look at trustworthiness as we build our models, we're ensuring that we provide the right parameters and security around the systems that we're using, and making sure that the data that we do have has there's the secure wrappers around it so that things like privacy, anonymizing our customers' data as we build and tailor these models to various types of malware that we're seeing in our environments can be secured. It's also important to realize that there's an educational piece that has to be put in place. When you talk about trustworthiness, how are we training the people who are building the models? Right, what are the types of policies we're putting in place to ensure that there's eyes watching those, behind the creation of the models, right? And making sure that stands out before we begin to implement these things for our customers, where they have the confidence that whatever we are able to put into our products, they can trust and use to secure their networks.
Is there a kind of a balance that you have to strike between making sure that the product is transparent and making to the customer, and making sure that in a security environment, it's not too transparent to the people who might be trying to breach the defenses of the agency that you're serving?
Yes, and so when consumers of our products, whether it's leveraging our inline machine learning, which helps with ensuring that those zero-day attacks or those unknowns can be discovered, also realize that when they receive our product, that we're aligning to what we say and we preach in terms of whether it's coming from our CEO, it's coming from our product teams, whether it's coming from our sales team, and ensuring that it aligns also to things like AI Bill of Rights that are coming out, whether it's aligning to memorandums that we see coming from the government, and making sure that stuff makes its way back into our product team, who's responsible for building out those ethical algorithms and models. For us, it's a little different because we're dealing with ones and zeros. And so from an ethical perspective, there's not as much as you would see when you're dealing with, PII or personal health records, right? And ensuring that an outcome based on health is not driven by a bias of someone who's building the model. Right? Our focus in terms of ensuring that we stop those people who are trying to break what the VA is trying to do in terms of providing those healthcare systems to their veterans is where we're really focused on.
Dmitry Kuznetsov of DHS talked about AI as a force multiplier. He didn't use that term, that's my term, but that's essentially, I think, the message he was trying to convey. What do you see in some of the use cases that you're doing at VA, AI providing just more muscle power behind some of the work that people have to do there?
Right. I think that's a good way to think about AI, is something that can augment some things that are already happening and make things more efficient. And in fact, some of the best applications are ones that are kind of help kind of support the overall structures. So you may, for example, look at, there are concerns around provider burnout or healthcare worker burnout. How can you make, for example, using natural language processing, be able to take images of notes and turn them into notes that are structured, that AI can process better and allow people to find those notes that they need more efficiently? So that doesn't that really just augments and makes it faster for them to find their notes rather than actually making decisions for them. There are lots of examples like that. For example, dictation and transcription, transcribing what someone has said to make it more efficient, and having that be linked to their workflow so they can more efficiently access the information rather than having to write down the notes, then later copying it and processing it in a more complicated way. So I think one of the keys is embedding it in the workflow itself, so that way it becomes most useful and more efficient for the end user. And that's what really we found, at least if you count the physician as the customer of this particular use case, or the healthcare provider, is what kind of makes them really use it and have a positive experience with that.
What does the force multiplier effect look like from a security perspective, Joe?
We have a workforce challenge. You've heard it on the news, you've heard it within the government, you've heard it across the board, and we see AI as that workforce multiplier that enables organizations to be better with what they have. And so, for example, you talked about the user experience. Imagine you sitting behind a keyboard, freshly new into the space, and you have a co-pilot that helps guide you through the process of ensuring your environment is secure, setting up the right policies to make sure that what you do set up is going to be effective, and getting those recommendations from the AI to say, hey, this is where we think you should best put your tools and resources to get the best out of it, right? And so that's one way in which we see it being a force multiplier, right, is making up for what you don't have. And then in addition to that, it's giving you the perspective to say, well, if these things are in place, what could that outcome be? And now I can be more targeted, right? When we talk about efficiencies, right? How can I be more efficient, not only with the few dollars I have, but with the few people I have? And so we see that as another mechanism in which we can help. There's two things that come to mind when we at Palo Alto think about AI, and that's the generative AI, right? Which is some of that large language model and knowledge representation. And can I type in a query and can I get a response, right? And then the other one is precision AI, which goes to this idea that we understand how important our role is in defending your network. So we must be precise with the information we're providing you to ensure when you do make that decision, when that colonel or whether that general or whether that undersecretary is determining whether or not they should make a decision, that they can rely on that data because it is precise and we have very little room for error, right? And so we see that as a force multiplier and be able to make the right decisions faster, and then ultimately the goal of reducing your mean time to respond, right, and the mean time to detect.
You used the two words that I had scribbled down here to ask you about next, and that's making faster decisions. How's AI driving faster decisions?
Yeah, look, the information is vast. We talked about it in the last segment. You talked about it in the last segment, the amounts of data that's being collected. You think about DHS as an organization and think about their role to be responsible for collecting all that diagnostic data across all the various agencies they support. A person can't do that. A team of 1,000 people can't do that. That's where that AI comes in to help with the decision-making process, look at the environment and be able to use the behavior to say, hey, this is where you all need to start making those decisions and provide those to the analysts and the decision-makers in near real time, right? And so what used to take us at an organization in Palo Alto Networks 30 days to respond to something, now it happens in minutes, right? And so we see that AI bringing in and mixing that with automation as a key driver in terms of the mean time to response and decision-making for organizations.
I want to go back to that idea that we discussed earlier about satisfying the demand signal, Gil. What does the demand signal look like? Now, what are people coming to you and coming to your teams and saying, we'd like to be able to do blank. We have this challenge that we need some help with. Maybe there's an AI solution, maybe there's not. What do those things look like? Are they primarily patient to provider? Are they primarily back office functions? What does that landscape look like at VA?
I think we're hearing different things from different stakeholders. So from physicians, for example, they're interested in some of those things that we're talking about, provider burnout, things like that. But there's also interest from them and from patients for more kind of extravagant types of AI around diagnosis and really things that are very exciting, some of which are ready and some of which need a little more work to be done. I think certainly some of the areas where you can see the biggest impact are potentially those back office or some of those that affect many applications rather than ones that affect just one application. Because again, the more data you have, the more it can work better because it has more data and so forth. So. And then from patients, we're seeing things around, they want to make sure that whatever application is developed is transparent or allows them to see and understand why decisions are being made a certain way. So that's kind of across use cases, I would say. But if there's a particular use case, it would be kind of that emphasis. And so that's why we find the trustworthy AI framework kind of helps address all these together, right? Is it fit for purpose? Does it, do you really need AI? Is there the security angle to it? Is there the transparency angle to it? So it's kind of I know it's called trustworthy AI framework, but it's almost like an AI framework overall to think about.
You used an interesting turn of phrase there, I think, Gil. You talked about AI applications that are ready versus ones where there's more work to be done. How do you know when something's ready, and how iterative can you be when maybe you have something that's ready but can be refined after it's in the field? Is there some level of refinement of iterability there for you?
Yes, indeed there is. So when you look at it, part of it involves the model and part of it involves the data. So let's just take one example. In the data, if that model was learned outside the VA, is it ready necessarily for the VA? The VA has a different demographics, different population, different geographical centers. So you have to kind of test it in these locations or retrain it with that additional data. If you look at the model itself, does the model take into account different variables, look at what are proxies to other variables to make sure that it will allow for equitable decision making and so forth. And so you need to look at both the data, the model, and also how you use it. And so each of those, as you take a step forward, you can kind of iterate, as you mentioned, and go from a pilot phase to a kind of a later phase, and then kind of distribute it through a network, because there are these hundreds of medical centers. So you don't have to start with all of them, right? You start with a few hubs and kind of learn from that and move forward.
Mm-hmm. Joe, what does iteration look like from a security perspective using AI applications? Do you have that same opportunity?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the things we do is we look at these adversarial samples, right? And so in classifying images, right, you need to make sure that the image you classify is right. And we know that the adversary is constantly trying to affect how these models work by including samples that may throw off the model. So if I know that this model is supposed to be Gil with this image, and then they throw in an adversarial sample that now turns Gil into Francis, well, that's the wrong class.
It's bad for Gil, for one thing.
And so we want to make sure we insert that as part of our process to ensure that we can catch these things early on in the development of the solution and running them through the models to ensure that when we say, hey, this is going to work, that the outcome for the customer is expected.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to follow on?
Yeah, actually, I think one thing that's interesting, when we talk about iteration and so forth, we're trying to bake that into the whole process and system, right? By having these different National AI Institute AI centers in different places, you have this paradigm where you can test and try it at several, and then kind of spread from there and go forward. So we just announced at the summit that you mentioned we're going to have 4 new AI centers like this, and we're looking forward to moving on the iterative process as well.
Where's this going? Obviously, exponential growth is something that appears pretty self-evident, but what direction do you see this growth going in, Gil?
The growth in AI in general?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there's kind of a couple different angles. One is kind of where AI, it's the part of AI that it kind of simulates and acts similar to a human in some ways, kind of more traditional AI in some sense. So that's something that we really didn't have before, where you could have something interacting with you that you aren't sure if it is a human or not, right? And so there's going to be there are a lot of questions about how to do that, but if there's transparency and so forth, that allows for a whole new set of functions. And I think that has that exponential growth curve kind of built right in there. And then the other AI is kind of traditional AI of like looking at data, analyzing a lot of data and finding patterns, and that certainly has growth as we are growing our data sets and so forth. And I think that it's going to be the combination of those two that's really going to be powerful, that increased data set, that human-like capability, and potentially embodiment through like robotics. So that synergy of 3 things, I mean, that's going to be really the future in terms of exponential synergy is what I would say.
Gil, Joe, terrific insights. Thanks both very much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
You can read more about AI at the VA and find the archive to the conversations I described at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the data deluge driving AI demand in financial management. AI in Depth continues in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. Federal government leaders have described data as the fuel that will propel AI. Financial management practitioners all across the government are finding new ways to use AI to drive mission and to manage agency budgets better. Vinay Singh is Chief Financial Officer at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Joe Baptiste is Senior Manager at EY. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. Vinay, you said before we went on the air something I thought was really interesting. You said AI to you is fully just a change management issue. How so, and what does that mean for the way that you and your colleagues approach AI at HUD?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I view it as change management because technology continues to evolve. We're always doing a new system, a new upgrade, and implementation. But really now, because of the force of AI, every stakeholder in our organization, in every organization, is involved, will be impacted. So it's a change management. I've done change management in projects all my career, and this is a significant one because we have to get it right. We don't want it to get shut down. There's a lot of guidance. And so this is essentially a communication exercise of talking to leadership, OGC, CIO. Wall Street Journal had a great article a month ago about the issue at organizations with AI is where's it going to be? Mm-hmm. And I'm not advocating that it be in CFO. It is not. We'll get to that later. But it is a massive change management.
If it's not in CFO, then that it means really collaboration is maybe one of the most important issues here, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the OCFO, as we know it in the federal government, cuts across, especially at HUD, we're decentralized. So we work with all the program offices as well as the support offices. And so we already have kind of the mechanics of how to govern, whether it be strategic goals that we involve our program partners, et cetera. So yes, collaboration is critical. We have one of our leaders in policy, data, and research, Solomon Green, has a monthly listening session. He started it months ago around AI and future technologies. And right now it is just that, as a listening session. And we are, we'll get into what we're doing. But at CFO, I really see this as educating folks.
I do want to get into what you're doing specifically with use cases later in the conversation. Joe, welcome. Thanks for coming on today. What are you seeing as you look across the landscape, not just at HUD, but all the agencies that you work with? Are most agencies still in that listening session phase, or are they moving on to use cases, as we heard earlier in the program? Or I guess the answer, as I've said several times on this show, is it depends, right?
Yeah, I think it really depends. I mean, as you look at the landscape of our civilian agencies, right? We heard from the VA, we heard from DHS earlier. They're being very progressive with some of the new technologies. And they're weaving in automation and AI together. And I think that's one of the things that's been making them successful in terms of how do you actually apply it? What we're seeing with most of the agencies right now is, yes, they're in listening mode, they're in learning mode, they're also in adapting mode. And so they're adapting to the new technologies, they're learning how to use them, they're kind of sharing those insights with their peers. And so when you have somebody who's used a technology before and then they're like, hey, this is actually really cool, and then you go use it, right? Actually having those hands-on experiences are making a big difference. So, as Vinay talked about the change management experience, that all leads to the same end goal, right? Of you're listening, you're learning, and then you're applying it down the line.
You wrote recently about 3 themes that you're seeing across the government. The first one's reimagining the enterprise. Are agencies taking this opportunity finally to rethink their business systems before they apply the AI tools? Is that what you're getting at?
Absolutely.
That's great.
When we realize, we look at the enterprise today, and we look at the enterprise in several years from now, it's going to continue to evolve based on the technologies, and they're a lot easier to use, right? And so several years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, we started to see RPA come on the scene. And everybody is like, oh, the RPA, this is really cool. But that was only the hands, right? There were the eyes, the ears, the mouth, all of those virtual things that were still being applied from an AI perspective, the natural language processing, the OCR. Those things were still actually technologies that weren't being applied then, 6, 7 years ago. But now you started to see over the years skills being embedded within, the traditional RPA bots, things being woven in within the AWS and the Azure stacks that, weren't available several years ago. So seeing a lot of that as we reimagine how we use technology and how we reimagine how we do processes, right? I'm an accountant in my early stages that turned technologist. So when I think about using AI and automation to do reconciliations, which our government, which is, Vinay's teams are doing all the time, or governments are doing all the time, big data, moving data from one system to the next, like those things can be done seamlessly now, where before you had to have somebody actually running the buttons and pushing the buttons.
You were really nodding enthusiastically, Vinay, when he talked about reimagining the enterprise. What's the importance of that? And is this kind of a seminal opportunity for you and other agencies, I guess, across government to really rethink the way that they do business and not just apply this new technology to current stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm also a process guy, so accountant, now technologist as well, but process is where it all starts, right? And governments, for decades, many of them bring in consultants, they write up a process, they do a review, it sits on a shelf. This is time where you can actually utilize this energy and capitalize on this energy. The programs are very excited, right? So use this enthusiasm to fix some of the processes. We're not going to do them all. We can't boil the ocean. But again, I'm focused on the operational impacts. And there's critical housing policy issues that need to be addressed. But again, that's kind of a separate piece that we will learn together, I think, on that.
So to your point about this being a change management issue, how do you develop enthusiasm then among people who may not, I mean, in every change management situation, you have some folks that are not really big fans of the idea. How do you bring folks like that along, or do you just have to recognize that there are going to be some folks that are going to maybe be left behind?
Well, you definitely have to go in knowing that you're not going to win everyone over, but you've got to go in. My style is always actually just have a discussion, right? And so I think one of the critical partners here, obviously, is the Chief Information Officer. Ours is Beth Nieblock, and so she and I have been tied at the hip talking about this. And in fact, I've been advocating for the CIO Council and the CFO Council to actually create a joint working group. Again, because there's just so much that CFO and CIO can do to build the fundamentals and then let the rest of the agency kind of jump in where they need to.
What are those things that the CFO and CIO can do together to build those building blocks?
The first thing is create a sandbox, right? So everyone is concerned about privacy, security, as they should be. So what we want to demonstrate with these small wins and this whole change management exercise is that we'll create a sandbox. We will only put in, let's say, public data that's already there, and play around with it to see if we can get the efficiencies and optimization of what we're doing.
How do you build a construct around that so that it isn't just experimentation, so that it's something that can form eventually something that you can scale?
Yeah, and that's what I talked to our Assistant CFO, Kate Darling, who runs our AI CFO working group, in building out an actual structure, right? So this governance, a steering committee, but then when we take in, so the intake of these use cases is also important to figure out what is the criteria we're going to set that this is a success. Therefore, it will be moved. It will get clearance from kind of a leadership perspective. Everyone votes on it, almost like an IT, piece that we review projects, and then it moves forward. We just have to be very vigilant. We've got to be very involved. I mean, I'm very hands-on on this because what my biggest fear is, there's so much legislation around this, but my biggest fear is that we just shut this thing down, because I see this as leapfrogging technologies, okay? So being in government, that we're often micromanaged, or technologies, budgets take a long time to develop, and implementations are 18 months, 36 months, a lot of failures. This can leapfrog some of the low-hanging fruit, and we can actually just move on and get our people excited to do value-added work, not the grunt, kind of transactional piece. It's what's at the end of that. What are those insights? And then what can we do with that? So, I always address my team when people are concerned about workforce. And I said, you're not going to lose jobs around this, at least for 20, 30 years. There's a great example given around operators when the telephone came about and everyone was concerned that operators are going to lose their job. It took 30 years before that happened. And everyone uses AI now. So it's a generational shift. It'll evolve. Sorry.
Joe, no, not at all. Because, Joe, I wanted to follow into that with another point that you made about building confidence in AI strategy. And it sounds like the steps that Vinay is taking is exactly in line with what you're writing about building that confidence. Absolutely. So that then a user or the person who's being served by that user understands what they've gotten and how they've gotten it. Is that a fair read?
Absolutely, yeah. One of the things, especially when we're dealing with, let's say CFO processes, right? If we have an AI-powered automation do something today that's going to be reported on, we're going to have to talk to auditors. They're going to have to be able to say, "Hey, how did you get that?" And when I first started doing audit work, one of the responses that came from the government years ago was, "I don't know. The system just populates it." Well, now we have to say, "Okay, well, we've built this AI system, this AI solution to help solve your problem, Vinay. This is exactly how it works. This is exactly the parameters. This is the data that goes in. This is the data that comes out." So when an auditor comes walking at the door, you got to be able to explain it. And the strategy around that starts with, the data. How do you get it? How do you use it? How do you display it? And then, what happens to it when it's no longer in use? And so those things, you have to really be very diligent about. You have to be very strategic in terms of application. Vinay talked about finding the right process, finding the right use case to apply. And then you asked, how do you sustain those things? Well, when you take these projects and you start small and you start to, what we found is when you explain them well enough and they work great, it's a natural transition into deployment.
How transparent does a bot have to be when the auditor comes to call? Because we've talked about transparency a lot on this program, but I imagine the answer a bot gave me that is not sufficient to suit the auditor.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, when any automations, right? When I say bots, it could be RPA, it could be a virtual agent, which is a chat bot. It could be something back end that you don't even see, in what we call, so these bots. When we create automations, we actually are very detailed in terms of exact steps. So when you think about a process map, you think about a 3-level process map. Well, automations really need to go down to the 5th level, the keystrokes, right? What are you looking at when you're looking at this Excel file? What is the AI going to interpret when it looks at this data? And how is it interpreting it? Is it interpreting it based on bias, right? So then we got to be truthful. How do we make the truth come out of it? And so, EY as an audit firm historically, right? From my experience, being able to show and document everything, and so everything starts with documentation. Most of the work that we do as technologists at EY is a lot of documentation, and then we spend, we have agile development cycles, but then we go back to the documentation to make sure it says what it said, what the AI is doing. So. It is very critical to be able to solve and answer those questions to GAO, to the auditors, to anybody who comes asking.
You talked about change management. At the beginning of this is how we framed it, Vinay, coming out of the box. What does that look like from a cultural perspective? What do you have to do? What would your peers have to do to be successful from a cultural perspective in an AI landscape?
It's change management to me is all about communication. So it's what is the script for various audiences. So this Thursday, RIG, Ray Oliver Davis, and I are speaking on AI at a panel. So it's even just kind of reaching out and saying, hey, we need to talk about this. I know you've got views, and sitting down and understanding what those different audiences need and creating that script.
Is there a way to measure success in either using AI broadly from a strategic perspective across the agency or from the individual projects? Like, what are the markers that you say, this is working the way that we would like it to work, or we need to rethink and redirect?
It's essentially, first of all, are we saving people's time? Right, it's number one is that's an easy ROI to just say we've gone from 1 year of doing an audit or a cycle to a day and a half, right? And then the real next level is what is that enabled that person to do? What extra insights are they bringing to the table? What's the new work? And so those are maybe soft or qualitative, but you have to track those.
Yeah, and do you track those in what way, I guess, is the way to ask the question. In what way do you track those?
So I do it, so first we're incubating a lot of this, so this is not all taken off. But the way I do it is when I talk to my leadership team around, do you have enough people? Are you able to get all the projects that you're trying to do? Can you get them done? And so it's around succession planning. Do we need to hire more? We're always going to need to hire more, but are they freeing up time? And so I will see when they say, these are the 10 things I'm going to work on this year, and all of a sudden those 10 things change because they solved 3 of them already. I'll see that change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joe, the third item on your list that we talked about earlier is augmenting human experience. That idea of augmenting human experience maybe is the source of a lot of the fear that people see in organizations like Vinay's, because they think we're going to apply these tools and he's not going to need me anymore. And you addressed that a few moments ago. What do you see as the best techniques that organizations can use to demonstrate that to folks and not just provide that acceleration, that accentuation, but to also communicate that to people so that they understand what they're getting?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's probably one of the funnest parts of my job, right? Like getting to, I would say, tinker, create these use cases, share the results with the community, and show them that the technology is not something to be feared upon. Especially, when you're looking at the FM community broadly, right? They're not technologists; they are process people. So when you tell them that a technology is going to come and wipe away their process or support them, augment them, they think that it's going to take their job. But essentially, if somebody could come in every day and have their 5 processes that they have queued up and they have an orchestrator, let's say, for lack of a better term, that they could go press play, that would empower them to want to do more things. And so, when we look at augmenting the workforce, it's not about taking their jobs. It's about, like Vinay said earlier, letting them do things faster. If we have 15 people that all are doing the same thing, processing the same thing, let's say processing invoices or documents, why not have AI be able to do that? Why not have AI be able to use optical character recognition and pull that information out and put it into the financial system? We're losing the ability to keep up. And so augmenting is not necessarily augmenting, it's providing a virtual workforce that can help support, the physical.
Vinay, this question's maybe more philosophical than tactical, but what does the FM community have to offer the broader conversation about AI and government that's a different perspective than maybe acquisition and human capital and technology are not thinking about, or are not thinking about on as forefront a level as the FM community is?
So, just being very... getting to the nuts and bolts of what Melajo, our CFO of Financial Management, and I talk about, they're huge, have already leaned into RPA, right, the robotics piece. And so the teams are already thinking how to use this information. But they produce the agency financial report, which is one of the most, and it's very difficult to do, but there's so much information in there. And I would love to, at our fingertips, be able to get the insights from that. So just even doing the management discussion analysis piece, if you have a virtual assistant that can answer my questions instead of me trying to convene a meeting, get to the bottom of what does this mean? How do we spend money? How can we do it better? There's so much there. And then from the audit perspective as well, the compliance piece, that's why I'm talking to the IG, because I really want us to build this together to figure out how we're going to do this right. I think FM has enormous space here.
Vinay, Joe, it's a great conversation. Thank you both very much for joining me today.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You can read more about AI and financial management at fedgovtoday.com. As you've probably learned from this program, the AI landscape in government is already filled with projects and potential. FedGov Today will keep you up to date on FedGov Today TV, Sunday mornings at 10:30 on ABC7 in Washington, and on our YouTube channel, on the FedGov Today podcast every Tuesday and Thursday, wherever you get your shows, and always on demand at fedgovtoday.com. My thanks to our guests from DHS, VA, and HUD, and our sponsors from AWS, Palo Alto Networks, and EY. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks very much for watching.